The popular young rock singer Jimi Hendrix died today in London.
Jimi Hendrix, electric guitar virtuoso, was one of the highest paid musicians in the world.
Jimi Hendrix was the greatest guitar player who ever lived.
Dazzling listeners with his riffs. Sometimes played with his teeth or behind his back, he was the ultimate guitar hero.
He'd already made 3 records that sold over 1 million copies each.
After his death on the 18th of September 1970, when he was just 27 years old, the coroner concluded that he died after breathing in his own vomit. But stating insufficient evidence of the circumstances, he returned an open verdict. Nearly half a century later, his death is still shrouded in mystery. Numerous conflicting accounts of his final hours have obscured the truth and fueled conspiracy theories about suicide and murder.
Jimmy? Jimmy?
The autopsy report of Jimi Hendrix concluded that he aspirated on vomit. Now, that's always been the legend of Jimi Hendrix's death, but is that actually what happened, and is that what killed him?
Dr. Michael Hunter is a world-renowned forensic pathologist. He's performed over 4,000 autopsies to investigate and reveal the cause of death. Today, he's the chief medical examiner in one of America's biggest cities.
This is Jimi Hendrix's autopsy report, and one thing that this report concludes is that Jimi Hendrix died aspirating on vomitous material. One thing you need to know about this report is it's very short. It's barely more than a page in length. The amount of information in here is very sparse, and I think it can also be misleading. So I don't buy this as a cause of death. I need to look at other possibilities for why Jimi Hendrix died.
September 17th, 1970, the day before Jimi's death. Jimi Hendrix is on the UK leg of his European tour. He meets up with one of his many girlfriends, German photographer Monika Dannemann. Jimi wants her to shoot photographs to use on his next album cover. According to Monika, Jimi is tired of his wild man image and plans to show the real, sensitive Jimi Hendrix.
He wanted me to take these photos because he felt the image he got from his management and record companies and the media was very, very wrong from the real Jimi Hendrix.
She takes 29 color photos of him, posing with his cherished Fender Stratocaster, a China tea service, and a rose. These are the last photos that will ever be taken of him, and Monika Dannemann will be the last person to see him alive.
This report tells me that Jimi Hendrix is a muscular young man, that there's no evidence of injury on him. So I think early on in the investigation, we can pretty much rule out that there's inflicted trauma that resulted in the death of Jimi Hendrix. But these photographs may tell us another story.
Although he looks physically strong, Jimi's strained smiles reveal an emotionally troubled man.
I think one of the interesting things about these photographs of Jimi is that while he's smiling, the upper part of his face, his eyes aren't smiling, basically.
Jimi should have every reason to be happy. He was an experimental guitarist with unique skills. Left-handed, he taught himself to play a right-handed guitar upside down. The sounds and effects that he produced set the gold standard of rock guitar skills. Filmmaker Tony Palmer saw this close up when he filmed this footage for his documentary.
I don't think Hendrix ever played a chord. I mean, he was playing 4 different melody lines with 4 different fingers, and I mean, it was extraordinary. There was nothing he couldn't do with the electric guitar. He was endlessly inventive, completely explosive about the way he played.
But his onstage stunts were attracting all the attention. Jimi was determined to focus on a new, serious direction for his music.
He didn't want to be on stage biting guitars and setting fire to them and kicking the amps in. But it put bums on seats and helped sell records. So the management were keen that he was going to stay in that vein.
Jimi hated the public image created for him and simply wanted to be known for his music.
He found the adulation embarrassing. Embarrassing to him personally, embarrassing to what he did as a musician.
You're considered one of the best guitar players in the world.
No. That he didn't understand why people worshipped him in the way that they did.
Well, one of the best in this studio, anyway.
How about one of the best sitting in this chair? How about
Yeah.
Part of this, of course, had to do with his extremely poor background.
Born Johnny Allen Hendrix on November 27, 1942, in Seattle, he was the only child of an alcoholic father and a frequently absent teenage mother.
When a child is little, it needs to feel that it has that sense of security, that they're worthy of love. If you look at Jimi's life, the idea that he's in effect abandoned by arguably the most significant person in his life, his mother, will have been likely to have affected him.
But Jimi found refuge in music. In 1957, after seeing Elvis perform in Seattle, his father bought him his first guitar. By 1967, he was a household name.
An experience for Jimi Hendrix, retaining his title as the world's top musician. Maurice Gibb of the Bee Gees doing the honor.
I mean, Jimi was the complete package. He could play better than anyone else. He could sing. He could write hit songs. Plus, he had the look, the clothes. He was the real deal. Women adored him. Blokes adored him. He was very sexual and very exotic.
The 24th of August, 1970. 4 weeks before his death, Jimi's staying at the Londonderry Hotel in central London. His behavior is causing concern. In the adjoining room, former girlfriend Kathy Etchingham arrives to find two of Jimi's friends, Angie Burden and Devon Wilson.
No, you just went crazy and just chucked us out.
They had spent the night with Jimi, but come the morning, he turfed them out, stark naked. In Jimi's bedroom, Kathy has other concerns.
What's going on?
The room is stifling. But feeling cold and shivery, Jimi turns up the heating.
Here in the autopsy report, he has a markedly dilated right side of his heart. The question is why? Now, he's in a very warm room, but he's cold. And that may suggest that he has either a fever or possibly an infection.
September 2nd, 1970, 2 weeks before his death. Jimi is performing in Aarhus, Denmark. Recently, he's been complaining about a cold that he can't shake off. Unusually, he's out of tune and forgets his lyrics. During his third song, he's carried back to his dressing room, exhausted and feverish. Is he suffering from rheumatic fever?
Jimi may have been suffering from an infection that led to rheumatic fever, and that can lead to serious heart problems. In more severe cases of rheumatic fever, the heart can become so damaged that it cannot pump blood around the body. This can lead to a shortage of oxygen, heart failure, and potentially to death. To diagnose rheumatic fever, you need to look carefully at the heart You want to look at the heart valves and see if there are irregularities and inflammation, and you want to look at the heart muscle. And in this particular case, those are absolutely normal, so I think I can rule out rheumatic fever. But this dilation of his heart might be a marker for a deadly infection.
Hospitals in London and many parts of the country have been sending out a desperate plea for help.
In 1970, a deadly virus known as Hong Kong flu struck the British capital. The flu virus attacks the respiratory system. Mucus builds up in the lining of the nose, the throat, and the sinuses to fight infection. If this reaches the lungs, it can cause pneumonia, which, left untreated, can be fatal.
For me to diagnose pneumonia, I'd take cultures of the lungs and look at the lungs microscopically. Those were not done in this particular case, but someone who has an active pneumonia would likely be hospitalized. So I think we can rule out pneumonia as a possible cause. So now I'm turning my attention to something else that can cause this dilation we're seeing in the heart: drugs.
Jimmy was a huge drug merchant. He would take pills, he would smoke dope, he would take cocaine, he would take everything, really. He was a professional drug taker.
Jimmy was catapulted into the drug-fueled world of rock and roll in 1966, when he was discovered by Chaz Chandler, bass player of the rock group The Animals.
That's where we first met him, and Chaz signed him up that night, and we had him in England a month later.
In 1967, the Jimi Hendrix Experience was formed in the UK, and singles Purple Haze and Voodoo Child shot to the top of the charts.
Chaz would take Jimmy into the studio, and without drugs, they wouldn't have got out the sounds they achieved. Jimmy was able to play the guitar better on drugs than off drugs.
The drug fueling Jimmy's style of psychedelic rock music was lysergic acid diethylamide, or the hallucinogenic drug known as LSD.
But at just this moment, neither he nor I know the direction or destination of the trip we're about to take together.
He told me that he experienced with drugs at an earlier stage, but not with heavy drugs like heroin. LSD he took, because at that time people thought it would expand your mind and it would, your spiritual, because he was a very, very spiritual man.
LSD is a hallucinogenic drug. So what it does is, in effect, it amplifies the state that you're currently in. If you're in a happy place, it makes you feel happier, makes you see colors more vibrantly, it makes you hear things more brightly. And I guess if you're a creative soul like Jimmy, this might be quite an interesting state to be in. It might be, it might make you feel that it's inducing that creativity. Of course, the other side are the bad states. So if I'm taking the drug and given my surroundings or my emotional state, I'm in a low place, then that's what's amplified. So people speak about bad trips being actually really horrific sometimes.
The autopsy report shows no evidence of LSD in Jimmy's body at the time that he dies. So LSD is unlikely to have played any role whatsoever in his death. LSD acts on perception and not on physiology. So I think we can rule out LSD as a cause of death.
In 1969, a year before his death, Jimmy was arrested at Toronto Airport and charged with heroin possession. He was later cleared, but the incident provoked rumors that Jimmy was a heroin user.
Heroin is a known killer, and in the 70s, it usually was injected. And because of those injections, you typically would see on the body track marks in the crook of the arm, and you don't see that in Jimmy. Also, when you look at the toxicology, there's no evidence that there's morphine in his system at the time that he dies. Morphine is the breakdown product of heroin that we see in heroin abusers. And the fact that it's not there, I think we can rule out heroin as a cause of death.
But by 1970, as Jimmy's reputation grows and the demands of his rock and roll career intensifies, he has come to depend on cocaine.
That was a bad cocaine period for Jimmy. Trying to be creative. Cocaine is not a drug for creativity or inspiration. It's almost like a drug for sort of getting through the day, really.
To confirm cocaine use, I'm looking for cocaine or benzoylecgonine, which is the breakdown product of cocaine, in either his blood or his urine, and it was not present. So he didn't take cocaine in the hours leading to his death. The autopsy report does show that he has 46 milligrams per 100 milliliters of alcohol in his urine.
"5 p.m., September 17th, 1970, the day before Jimmy's death. Jimmy is at an impromptu party in central London. He barely knows the other people, but he's relaxed and friendly. And according to party host Philip Harvey, he's drinking red wine.
Don't think alcohol agreed with Jimmy much anyway. Nobody's given many accounts of Jimmy actually being drunk. I don't really think he didn't really do that.
But today, Jimmy is drinking much more than usual. He's at the party with current girlfriend Monica Dannemann. The daughter of a rich German industrialist, she later claims that she and Jimmy are about to become engaged. Tappy Wright, Jimmy's road manager, witnessed the strange relationship between Jimmy and Monica.
Monica Dannemann was she was a strange girl. She was obsessed with Jimi Hendrix. Jimmy was somebody that he could go home at night and sleep with, you know. She thought she was going to marry him and have babies.
Famously, his last few days of his life, Jimi Hendrix was with Monica Dannemann, and it's interesting because Monica wasn't in his circle, wasn't a musician, wasn't famous. She was an ice skater, and there are several reports about her being very possessive of Jimmy, wanting to very much, be part of his life. It can't have been easy for her trying to live up to being the girlfriend, even for a short period, of this icon. By the same token, from his point of view, one wonders how that possessiveness would have made him feel. It may, have made him feel loved, but it may have very much made him feel suffocated as well. So it would have been interesting to see how they were relating to each other during those final moments.
Other accounts confirm that Jimmy had no plans to settle down with Monica. Wherever he went, women followed. His sexual appetites and adventures were legendary.
I have been out with Jimi Hendrix to somewhere like the Bag of Nails, which was a big nightclub in the 60s in London. I've seen him have 5 different women in one night.
I really dig her, she's really nice looking, So I said, oh, well, I'll probably stand there, and then there I go. I'll be biting into an apple maybe or something,
At the party on the afternoon before his death, Jimmy's charm is working. He chats to 2 young girls who are succumbing to his sexual charisma, while Monica is getting increasingly jealous.
All the way through that afternoon and into the evening, Monica didn't want Jimmy to be with anyone else. It just wound her up.
Feeling stressed and suffocated by Monica, he's drinking heavily.
Toxicology shows that Jimmy had been drinking prior to his death. He has 46 milligrams% of alcohol in his urine, and he's got 5 milligrams% in his blood. Those are very low levels. So I think if he is intoxicated, we have to find a different culprit. There is another clue here. There is a quantity of amphetamine identified in his urine.
September 18th, 1970, 2:30 in the morning, the day of Jimmy's death. Jimmy has given Monica the slip. Desperate to be free of her, he's left her at the Samarkand Hotel and goes to another party. Having spent the afternoon and evening drinking and feeling stressed and exhausted, Jimmy is entering the last hours of his life.
I think Jimmy was in a kind of eye of the storm, really. And some of that storm that was swirling around him were people who were really not very nice people at all.
Jimi is now with his familiar entourage, including former girlfriend Devon Wilson, one of the women he threw out of his hotel bedroom 4 weeks earlier.
If I had to describe the relationship between Devon Wilson and Jimi Hendrix, she was his pimp. She would go out and she would get all sorts of girls for Jimi. And Jimi liked that, of course. And because of that, Jimi and her were very good friends. Plus, she'd get him a few drugs. And, so she would take some drugs along and a couple of women, and he was happy.
According to later investigations, it's Devon who supplies Jimi with the amphetamine. Amphetamine is a potent central nervous system stimulant. It works by increasing neurotransmitter activity in the brain to increase libido, wakefulness, and euphoria.
The forensic evidence backs this up. The autopsy report mentions the presence of Durafet, and in the 60s, Durafet was sold on the street as Black Bomber. Jimi is mixing both alcohol and amphetamines, which can lead to a drug-induced haze, severely impairing his judgment.
We used to go mad with Jimi because we used to say, you know, Jimi, at the end of the day, you don't know what you're getting off these people. It could kill you.
Our knowledge of what drugs could do to the body, especially when mixed with alcohol, then was utterly inadequate. We had really no idea. We didn't know that if you drink and you take drugs, you're probably in trouble.
Where is he going?
At 3 in the morning, Jimi goes back to Monica's hotel, the Samarkand in Notting Hill. From this point on, we have only Monica Danneman's account of the final hours of Jimi Hendrix's life. 3:30 in the morning. Monica says she makes a meal that Jimi doesn't eat. At some point, he works on lines to a song or a poem. They stay up till 4 a.m., when Monica eventually falls asleep.
There's only 2 people who know exactly what happened. Sadly, both of them are dead.
Somewhere between 9 and 10 on the morning of September 18th, 1970,
Jimi?
Monica Danneman wakes up. She can't wake Jimi,
Jimi?
but says that he's still breathing.
Jimi? Jimi?
She notices that he's vomited. Panicking, she calls his friends,
There's something wrong with Jimi.
who persuade her to call an ambulance. At 11:18, a call to the ambulance service from the Samarkand Hotel is officially logged.
Hello, can you hear me? Can you open your eyes for me? This is the paramedics.
When they arrive, the ambulance men try to resuscitate Jimi. At 12:45, Jimi is admitted to St. Mary Abbott's Hospital. The attending doctor, finding no heartbeat and no pulse, declares that he is dead.
The popular young rock singer Jimi Hendrix died today in London.
I was in my lawyer's when my driver came in and he says, "There's no hurry, he's dead." And I said, "Who's dead?" He says, "Jimi Hendrix." I says, "Get out of here, what do you mean, he's dead?" He says, "He's dead, 27 years old, he's dead."
But he'd already made 3 records that sold over 1 million copies each, and his harsh voice and throbbing electric guitar were major attractions around the world.
I remember listening to the radio in complete disbelief, complete shock that this power this life force had been cut off. You know, somebody turned the light off. I didn't know how, I didn't know why.
The official conclusion of Jimi Hendrix's autopsy was that he died of asphyxiation on vomit while intoxicated, but the coroner returned an open verdict.
So I've closely examined this autopsy report, and there's nothing to justify a conclusion that Jimi at this point was either intoxicated or had actually asphyxiated on his vomit. But I've been looking at this statement made by the emergency room physician who took care of Jimi in the hospital, and he does mention that there's a considerable amount of alcohol in his pharynx and larynx, meaning that there's a considerable amount of alcohol in his throat. This is a perplexing statement, and it's fueled this disturbing theory that Jimi Hendrix had been murdered.
During Jimi's European tour, tensions between him and his manager Michael Jeffries were rising. Jeffries wanted Jimi on the road earning ticket sales. Road manager Tappy Wright witnessed the breakdown of the relationship.
There was a big argument between Mike Jeffries and Jimi Hendrix as to which way his music should go. Jimi wanted it as like an artist thing, and he wanted to even change the music a little bit. And Mike Jeffries says, no, you can't, it's got to stay as it is, because that's a winning format.
September 17th, the day before Jimi's death. Witnesses at the Cumberland Hotel where Jimi had a room report that he returns to make a number of calls.
Yes, Jimi.
One of these is to his American lawyer, who he shares with Mike Jeffries. Jimi has made a decision. He's going to leave Jeffries.
Not only did Jimi instruct lawyers to draw up papers to annul the management contract, but he'd also taken Mike Jeffries to court in New York for embezzlement.
Jimi Hendrix was Mike Jeffries' only source of money. He could do all sorts of deals because of Jimi Hendrix. He was probably the biggest artist in America. So without Jimi Hendrix, Mike Jeffries would have been bankrupt, basically.
Jeffries had borrowed money to buy and convert a club into a recording studio in New York City. With his debts mounting and a lucrative insurance policy in place, theorists insist that he had a motive to murder Jimi.
Mike Jeffries told me that how he did it was he and a couple of friends had used an old army trick, which it's kind of called waterboarding now. You can pour liquid straight into the lungs and it drowns the person. And this is how they killed Jimi Hendrix.
This might account for the alcohol in Jimi's throat that the hospital doctor noted.
Any murder claim, especially one as sensational as this, needs to be taken very seriously. If alcohol had been forced down his throat, I would have expected to see signs of struggle, injuries on his body. I would have also expected to see alcohol in his stomach and an elevated alcohol level in the blood, which we do not see. I think there is another explanation to account for the doctor's observations. During and after death, gases can force gastric fluids out of the gut and into the lungs. Any pressure imposed on the body, even movement, could force the liquid out of the lungs and into the throat. I think it's this liquid and not alcohol that the ER physician witnessed. 45 years ago, I think he made a mistake. Our knowledge is much more detailed now. For this reason and the lack of injuries or increased alcohol in his system, we can discount murder.
London's Metropolitan Police had investigated Jimi Hendrix's death, but never charged anyone with a crime. After Tappy Wright's allegations were published in 2009, the case was not reopened. But at the inquest, the coroner raised the question of suicide. Is it possible that Jimi Hendrix took his own life?
There were all sorts of pressures, and I think they were playing on his mind at that time.
So far, I'm not seeing a natural cause. I'm not seeing evidence that there was a homicidal act. I'm not seeing an intoxicated state at this point that explains his death. As I look into the autopsy report, I notice that there is the drug quinolbarbitone identified in the urine. Now, quinolbarbitone is a barbiturate, a very powerful sedative, and it was used primarily in the 60s and the 70s as a sleeping aid.
According to her own evidence, Monica Dannemann was using a prescribed German brand of sleeping tablet called Vesperax. In the small hours on the day of Jimmy's death, she takes one.
The main component of Vesperax is quinolbarbitone, and that's what was found in Jimmy's blood.
When you're a musician, you're not working 9 to 5. You don't have normal hours. When you have to perform, you have to be up and you've got to perform and be awake on demand. Likewise, you need to be asleep on demand because maybe, we finish a gig, it's 3 in the morning, but you're on some show at 9 a.m. So you've got those 5-6 hours to sleep. If you can't sleep, then you can't perform. So what ended up happening is that, one's normal bodily function of sleeping and waking would be outsourced. I'm going to turn to drugs.
In the early hours, Jimmy takes a number of Vesperax himself. During a search of the room later that day, an empty blister pack of Vesperax and a stray tablet are found near where Jimmy lay.
Every package of Vesperax has 10 pills. There is one identified on scene, so it's likely Jimmy could have taken up to 9 pills. The coroner who oversaw the initial investigation in 1970 brought up the possibility that Jimmy took these medications in a deliberate attempt to cause his death. Is this a suicide?
The atmosphere towards the end wasn't really good at all. You could tell that he was not the same Jimmy as we all know him to be, fun-loving and everything. He was an unhappy person.
At some point, in the hours before his death, Jimmy had written a poem, The Story of Life. The next day, Jimmy's friend, the singer Eric Burdon, finds the poem. The final line is a bleak take on the end of love.
Eric was convinced that Jimmy had committed suicide. Eric had seen these lyrics, or were they lyrics? Eric obviously thought it was a suicide note, written in the form of a poem.
Soon after, Burdon announces that Jimmy has committed suicide. At the time of his death, Jimmy was facing 2 paternity suits and trying to juggle the demands of a turbulent and promiscuous love life. Monica Dannemann was claiming that they were about to become engaged, but she was only one of several girlfriends that Jimmy was having to please.
So the papers have dedicated quite a few column inches to...
And that wasn't all. After a series of disappointing gigs on his European tour, Jimmy was despondent and rambling during press interviews. He remarked to one journalist that he's not sure he'll live to be 28.
He looked very, very tired. Tired because of just physical exhaustion, tired because of the constant pressure of being expected to deliver something extraordinary. And I think he was backing away from that as rapidly as he could. There were other pressures on him, which I didn't know at the time. The family, difficulties with his management, difficulties with his record company. It was just all kind of crowding in on him at the same time.
But were these the reflections of someone who was suicidal?
Many times in our life, we actually rise up out of pain, rise up out of adversity, and that's what gives us the impetus, the momentum to make changes. So the idea that because Jimmy had been going through a rough period, that it was inevitable that he would stay down, it was inevitable that he'd be depressed, it isn't true. What we know is in those last few weeks, Jimmy seems to have made a positive turn. He's starting to make changes, or at least think about making changes, possibly changing his manager, thinking about taking his music in new directions. So this is the sign of someone that's decided, you know what I've been doing so far isn't working. I need to make a positive change.
Witness accounts from the party that he attended the day before his death describe how optimistic he was about the future.
I've read ridiculous rumours and reports and first-hand accounts that it was suicide. I think that's absolute nonsense. I think he loved life. He loved women. He loved alcohol. He loved playing. He loved music. He loved everything. To excess, that was part of the problem.
So if he didn't want to take his own life, why did he take 9 tablets? At the time, UK sleeping pills were much weaker than German Vesperax. Is it possible that Jimmy was just desperate to sleep?
This had happened previously on the European tour when he'd been feeling really bad and just swallowed a load of pills, sleeping tablets with red wine, because he was feeling just depressed and miserable. Now, some people have extrapolated that was some sort of suicide attempt, but there is no evidence for that. It was probably just a way of shutting the world out.
Jimmy was clearly stressed, he was unhappy, and he was certainly concerned about his music. But there is nothing else about him or the scene that suggests he intended to kill himself. I'm getting closer to figuring out the cause of Jimmy's death, but I also want to know why the autopsy report concluded that he aspirated on his vomit.
3:30 a.m., September 18th, 1970. After returning to the Samarkand Hotel, Jimmy is wired from the stimulant effects of taking an amphetamine black bomber. He can't sleep. He's seen Monica Danneman take a Vesperax sleeping tablet and decides to follow suit.
And the interesting thing is, at that time, it's very likely that sedatives were prescribed, so the whole notion of them being dangerous wouldn't have even occurred to people taking them in the 1970s. This is something my doctor's given me to be able to relax. Surely, it can't do any harm. And that was a scary thing, I guess, at that time.
Vesperax, which contains the barbiturate quinobarbital, is twice as strong as other sleeping tablets. So, for example, if he took 8 or 9 of these tablets, that's many times the recommended dosage for this medication.
Well, I don't think Jimmy would have been aware of dosages generally. I think he would have thought, as many people would have thought, in terms of numbers of pills. You know, 1 pill will make you drowsy. If you really want to knock yourself out, you take more. And I don't think it would have been any more sophisticated than that.
To understand what happened here, I think you have to follow the medical consequences of taking this extreme amount of Vesperax. As Jimmy sleeps, the barbiturate in Vesperax is absorbed into Jimmy's blood and his breathing slows down. I think now I'm getting closer to understanding the truth. The toxicology report shows that he has a very considerable amount of quinobarbital in his system. He has 0.7 milligrams percent in his blood, and he's got 3.9 milligrams percent in his liver. That is a very high level, and it's potentially lethal. As Jimmy's breathing slows down even further, his heart beats faster to pump more oxygen, carrying blood around his body. As oxygen levels in his lungs drop, fluid builds up, causing pulmonary edema. He's currently in a downward spiral, and his oxygen levels are dropping. That's going to worsen his respiratory failure over time. As a result, the pulmonary edema builds up, and Jimmy's brain and heart are starved of oxygen. Soon after, he lapses into a coma and dies.
Jimmy. Jimmy. Jimmy.
I have no doubt that Vesperex is what killed Jimmy. His aspiration on his vomit is not the reason why he's died. Jimmy did aspirate some vomit, but only when his brain was already irreparably and fatally damaged. Jimi Hendrix died not as a result of him choking on vomit, but of polydrug toxicity. The drugs he had in his system, primarily that of quinylbarbital, led ultimately to his respiratory failure and his death.
As far as I'm concerned, it was a horrible, tragic accident. And the year Jimmy died, in the UK, 1,000 people died in a very similar way through an accidental barbiturate overdose.
Jimmy's body was flown to his hometown of Seattle, Washington, and buried on the 1st of October, 1970.
Quite often the candle that burns the brightest burns the shortest. Jimi Hendrix was undoubtedly the most influential contemporary music performer of the 20th century, no doubt.
I still miss Jimi Hendrix very much, because it's not so much he still feels, I still feel like he's here, because I can't pick up a magazine. I get emails and texts and everything. It's always Jimmy, 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 Jimmy. The world is such a poorer place without Jimmy.